ways than one to Cochin's arts establishments and social organizations. He expressed his passion for the arts by curating a light and sound walkthrough of 2000 years of Kerala's unique cosmopolitan history. The spectacular Museum of Kerala History was opened to the public in the year 1987. Madhavan Nayar then studied and collected works of renowned Indian painters and sculptors to build the art collection for the Gallery of Contemporary Indian Art. In 1992, that houses 200-odd works by Indian masters spanning the past century. This is a must-see collection for art lovers. The Center for Visual Arts and the Amphitheatre function as the museum's dynamic spaces, offering creative learning opportunities for curious minds of all ages. With a 37-year-long track record as a non-governmental initiative, providing authentic learning experiences in history, fine arts, and performing arts, the museum has hosted over 500,000 visitors comprising domestic and overseas tourists and ignited the minds of school children from hundreds of schools all over India. Today, the museum is a vibrant arts venue powered by a robust visitor-centric approach, in-house curations, collaborations with other arts-based organizations, and NGOs working across a spectrum of social issues. Audiences in Kochi have responded with great enthusiasm to the extended repertoire of the Kerala Museum. Located just past Lulu Mall on your way to the airport, the museum is also accessible by Kochi Metro. We encourage you to plan a visit soon and keep in touch with us via our active and engaging social media channels.
So good morning and a warm welcome to the launch of the Highlights and the Hidden Gems, the virtual exhibition of the Kerala Museum Madhavan Nayar Foundation collection on the Google Arts and Culture platform. When our founder, Madhavan Nayar, envisioned an art resource for the students and public that would provide an immersive and impressive view of the evolution of modern art in India, little would he have imagined the MNF collection in the palm of our hands. Our new partnership with Google Arts and Culture has enabled us to inspire and delight a global audience and illustrate our collection's importance. To further expand our reach and to make the collection uniquely accessible, we have made it available in Malayalam and English. This will be the first collection of its kind from Kerala to harness the Google Arts and Culture platform's multilingual capabilities, enabling users and learners, whether on a large screen or on a mobile device, to intuitively search and experience art in Malayalam and English. The ultra high resolution digitization of over 200 of our artworks using the gigapixel technology has created a resource bank on modern Indian art, the likes of which exists nowhere else. We look forward to inviting students and scholars from across Kerala, India, and the world to experience our collection's highlights and hidden gems, offline and online. Before I go on to give you an overview of the event, we at the Foundation would like to make a special mention of many in this project. Supriya Menon, who curated the exhibitions, the artist Murali Chirot, who's been a part of the Foundation's journey since the very beginning, Trustee Arundhati Nayar and art historian Gopika Krishnan, who teaches at RLB College, Tripunithara, worked on content. Jyoti George, special mention, who tirelessly edited and managed the project at our end, alongside her many other duties at the museum. and the team at Google Arts and Culture, especially Pranab and Bhaskar and Abhishek. Lastly, to bring this collection out in Malayalam, translator Geeta Nayar worked at lightning speed, and we are immensely grateful to you, Geeta Nayar, for your efforts. Today in this webinar, we have with us several eminent speakers, and I'm going in order of appearance. Trustee and urban designer, K.T. Ravindran, Additional Chief Secretary of State to the Government of Kerala, Dr. Venu Vasudevan, and Member of Parliament for Thiruvananthapuram, Dr. Shashi Tharoor. We also have with us the renowned artist, Professor Ghulam Mohammad Sheikh, in conversation with art historian, Professor Anshuman Dasgupta. They will delve into the linkages between the Shantiniketan and Baroda schools of art. I am Aditi Nayar Zacharias, Director of the Kerala Museum, Madhavan Nayar Foundation, and I shall be moderating the session. Let's begin with the introduction of the first speaker, Madhavan Nayar Foundation trustee, Professor K.T. Ravindran. Professor K.T. Ravindran is an urban designer, chairman of the Architectural Heritage Advisory Committee of INTAC, trustee of the Indian Heritage Cities Network Foundation, and was member of the advisory board for the United Nations Capital Master Plan, New York. He was dean and senior academic advisor, RICS School of Built Environment, was the former chairman of the Delhi Urban Art Commission, and was the founding president of the Institute of Urban Designers, India. Over to Professor K.T. Ravindran to make the opening remarks for today's session.
Thank you, Aditi. I'm immensely grateful to you for this privilege of being part of your trustees, as well as having given me the opportunity to speak today in such an eminent panel as we have. We are going to have Mr. Shashi Tharoor inaugurate the Google collaboration with Madhavan Nayar Foundation. And we have also with us the most eminent artist, writer, poet, everything rolled into one, Mr. Ghulam Mohammad Sheikh. So I'm really honored that I'm in the midst of these giants. Also grateful for you to put me in the presence of Dr. Venu Vasudevan, who has been singularly responsible for a lot of transformation in the world of art and museum in India. I have known him closely for many, many years, and I've always seen that his infectious enthusiasm and his insight into the world of art can really transform the way a museum or even a Department of Culture could function at the state level, as well as in the central level. In fact, I recall very much the most active phase of the National Museum in Delhi was at the time when Dr. Venu was in charge of it. It was so full of events, so full of finest exhibitions. He really had an insight into public outreach. And the purpose of our webinar today is actually to discuss the public outreach of art, and no one better than Dr. Venu to highlight these aspects. Thank you for having me here to all of you. And Dr. Anshuman Dasgupta is a professor at Shantiniketan, as well as he's a theoretician. And I'm most happy to be in the midst of all of you. Thank you so much. Now, I'd like to start by talking about how the museum as a concept has actually transformed over a period of time. When it began, it was more or less like a place where you deposit all the valuable objects of art. And it was just lying there, mostly unseen, and only seen, if at all, by the art elite of every place. From there, museums have really traveled a long way. And now they've become active agents of social change. They are reaching out to people instead of people waiting for people to come and land in their web. But they are now reaching out to people in so many different ways. They hold small exhibitions, they have retrospectives, they have seminars, they have workshops, they have outreach with children. They have so many different ways in which they actually meet people on a common ground of interest in art. But that still is at another stage in the sense that it still requires the effort of the audience to arrive at the museum to be able to participate in many of these things. Of course, one of the most interesting things that has happened in many museums is that they're also venues of some of the finest art cafes in the world. The museums in the world, when I was traveling around, I always made sure that I went to the art museum, modern art museum, to look at the artworks and had the privilege of seeing so many originals. And at the same time to enjoy the peace and quiet of the art cafe, where one could sit and contemplate or meet interesting people or write letters home or write letters to friends, then doodle in your own sketchbook and so on. So it has always been a kind of source of creative action because it gives you a free and absolutely kind of unrestricted environment where you feel like a free particle, where you can respond to what you see and what you hear. So museums have really changed from those days. And now they have come to, we are moving into a different location in terms of that outreach. We are now moving into digital access. And it was really a foresight from the part of Madhavan Nayar Foundation to decide to collaborate with Google and bring out a high-resolution version that will be accessible for all. Now, this is a real milestone movement because so far, the white cube, what we call the proverbial white cube, which is a rarefied, white painted, neutral gallery space with uniform lighting and so on. From that rarefied environment, we are now taking art into people's laps. It's a very major shift that's happening from the white cube to now the old saying in Buddhism is about how when Buddha came to Banaras, rather he went to, he broke his Mauna-vrata, that is, he was in silence for 8 years. And then he broke his silence in Banaras, the outskirts of Banaras. And that is described as the event of coming down from the mountain to the marketplace. Metaphorically, it's a metaphoric marketplace, not a place where you have a transaction, but where you exchange ideas. So Buddha shared his wisdom for the first time in Sarnath, speaking to people. Yeah? So that is what is happening roughly to works of art when you digitize them and you make them available for common people. You are bringing the art from the mountain to the marketplace, where there is direct communication, eye contact of people with their own works of art. So the manner in which it will impact the future of viewing art is another issue altogether. Will it affect the art market positively or negatively? Will it improve the value of artworks in the public domain? If something is featured in the museum art space, does that increase the value of the artist and the artwork? There are all kinds of ways it can get interpreted. The most important thing is that it becomes an extremely effective tool of communication, which is basically education. Education is a form of communication. It's nothing more than that. And unfortunately, we have shrouded it with hierarchies and professorships and so on and so forth. But in effect, it is a question of how communication takes place easily. And the digitized tool that will be now made available by Google to all and everyone free of cost online is going to be a very, very effective tool in that process of communication, which we call education. So as far as art is concerned, I think we need to understand that it's one of the most effective tools of transforming minds of people. And the interesting part about our current occasion is that Madhavan Nayar actually foresaw this more than 30 years ago, 37 years ago to be precise, when he laid down as the basic driving factor of the objective of the museum to be one which will use the agency of culture to improve citizenship. It's a very interesting concept, and it's a concept which is almost like 25 years ahead of its time. And it envisions the role of art as an active political agent, which will change the level of awareness of the viewers to a point where they become more mindful of the political and cultural processes that's happening around them in society. So a work of art has that capacity, because the artist or the poet or any of the people who are in the creative field, creative communication field, are actually transforming their own responses to the current situation and converting that into a work of art. And then that active agency of the art begins there, both as an admixture of the artist's intent and the viewer's perception. So it undergoes very interesting changes, but at the same time, the transformative quality of a work of art is actually established very well there. It is from this perspective that the efforts of the Madhavan Nayar Museum, Madhavan Nayar Foundation and Kerala Museum to put this artwork into the public domain is in fact reaching those rare sensibilities which the artists are kind of, they have the gift of that sensibility and the capacity and the skill to transform that sensibility into a communicable piece of art. And it is reaching that piece of art to the public means transforming the public mind at a very fundamental level. I think this, to me, is one of the most important things about this current effort that we'll be doing. And we have to discuss that. We have Mr. Shashi Tharoor, who is actually one of the finest minds that we have in our country, and perhaps the most articulate minds that we have in our country. So we look forward to welcoming all of you, Mr. Tharoor, Mr. Ghulam Mohammad Sheikh, Mr. Anshuman Dasgupta. I'm not welcoming Dr. Venu because he's part of us, and I have no right to welcome him. He should be welcoming me. And thank you all. I'll now hand over back to you, Aditi.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you for that crisp and concise opening statement and for setting the backdrop of MNF's vision for us. I'll now introduce Dr. Venu Vasudevan, who's Additional Chief Secretary to the Government of Kerala, with the charge of several departments, including museums and archives. He joined the Indian Administrative Service in 1990 and has served the Government of India and the Government of Kerala in various capacities. He served as Secretary, Cultural Affairs, Government of Kerala, and Joint Secretary, Ministry of Culture. As Director General of the National Museum, as Professor Ravindran was saying just now, he worked on the revival of the National Museum, initiating a range of projects that improved arrivals, enhanced its visibility, involved stakeholders, and the academic community. He served as Vice Chancellor, National Museum Institute of Art, Conservation, and Museology. He played a key role in the improvement and upgradation of the museums and archives of Kerala, and he continues his interest in developing community museums with local participation. I welcome Dr. Venu to speak on the topic, Living Monuments of Education, Museums in the 21st Century.
Thank you, Aditi, for that very generous introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here amidst some great minds. Sheikh Saab, who's our doyen in the cultural field, K.T. Ravindran sir, again, someone who I have had the privilege of associating for many, many decades now, Professor Dasgupta, and all others who've joined us in this wonderful occasion. For me, it's a very, very happy occasion because of several things. One, as being part of the MNF family, it is a matter of pride for us when we take this great step forward. And also, all the attendant possibilities that the museum is gaining because of this partnership sets my mind racing. But also, it's for me, another happy coincidence is that I'm renewing my association with the Google Arts project. My mind goes back to 2011-12 when the Google Arts project was just starting in the country. It had already been around for a couple of years, I think, in other parts of the world. But in Delhi, when I was in the Ministry of Culture, the contract, the agreement between the Ministry of Culture and the Google Arts project was signed. And later it became, part of my responsibility to steer it through. And at that time, it was fascinating, the kind of technology that was brought in and how we managed to bring in several of our most famous and most important, significant artworks from all the major collections of the Government of India, whether it is the National Museum, whether it is the Indian Museum, the National Gallery of Modern Art, all into the ambit of virtual exhibitions and under the partnership with Google Arts project. And what is fascinating then was the technology that they brought in, and a mention has already been made about it, about the kind of precision and the kind of magnification that is possible with the technology. I remember being absolutely floored when I saw our miniatures collection, for instance, after being digitized and after being available in the public domain. When one went into the digitized collections of our miniatures, there were options in not several of them, at least a few of them, where one could actually zoom in and sort of, the whole masterpiece took a completely different view because one was getting this extremely close-up view and how the painter would have probably done those brush strokes. So it's brilliant that MNF is now part of the global Google Arts family, and I think that sort of brings the exhibitions that we have, our artworks into the rooms of several thousands, if not lakhs of people. I have been interested in this whole idea of how museums speak to the general public for several years. And I think one of the important things that we do at the beginning of this very significant new partnership and engagement with the public at large is the fact that we are also giving an option in communicating with them and reaching out to the audience using Malayalam as a communication language. For all those people here who are more comfortable in their mother tongue, I think this is a very significant thing, and I think it is a way for all museums to go. I think so. We are setting a standard. Our museum may be small, our collection online may be small, but I think the benchmark now has been set. I can safely say that perhaps our websites, the Government of Kerala Museum's sites, may not have this kind of an access in terms of providing information in Malayalam to the audience. I think that's a very, very important step. Another thing is, I think now coming to the topic that's been given to me, education is a very dicey word, because one always feels that there is the connotations that education has, is often the problem. And this is not a problem about us in Kerala or India. Globally, museum educators have been struggling to find their space. Historically, there's always been this difference between curators and the experts, the so-called curators of museums, and the educators who seemingly occupied a level lower to the scholars. But I think all that has changed in the last 20 or 30 years globally, and as well the winds of change are sweeping through our museums as well. Education is actually seen as a multidisciplinary kind of a project. It involves engagement. It is the first part. Many people would say that engagement and participation with the public is not really education. I beg to differ. I believe that the educators are part and parcel of this larger outreach project that every museum has a responsibility to do. And I think important the part is that while education across the world has evolved, education within museums has probably gone far beyond the normal trajectory of how our education is evolving. We see museums and we immediately say in India, in Kerala, we say, okay, here are the students. Now tell them about what they will learn in school and how an artwork or a product there can actually be useful to them. There is nothing called usefulness in museums. I believe that a child of 5 will be very happy in our museum, in the Madhavan Nayar Museum, if there are people who are intelligent enough, wise enough, and who are thoughtful enough to understand how that artwork should speak to that little child. And this opportunity that's given to us through this virtual museum project, the virtual exhibitions, offers so many beautiful opportunities for us to connect, for us to reach out and create these small projects, which will then speak to different kinds of audiences in the language of their choice. And I think the most important thing is something which was brought out by Katie as well. Do you think that the virtual world will replace the real museum experience? The thoughtful time, the pensive time that Katie and all of us have spent in museums, in that cafe, it will never do so. Instead, it gives us, people in the museums, it gives us an opportunity to speak to a large audience. And through that exchange of that conversation, bring those audiences into our museums. Because at the museum, the level of interaction, the engagement completely changes. Because it is not merely the artwork. It is about the ambience of being in the presence of these greats. Being awed and humbled by thinking about the people who actually put their effort in creating the spaces, in putting all these artworks together. And that is the kind of deep and beautiful relationship that every museum aspires to connect, to build with that audience. So I will stop now. I would only say that this gives us opportunities and potential. And I think that this will be a landmark new step for this wonderful museum of ours, the Cochin, the metropolis of Cochin, and indeed the entire state of Kerala has no other museum that provides access to the masters of our modern art. And Kerala Museum should be the proud flag bearer of art for the entire state. So I think this step that we are taking together today will be a proud moment for all of us. And I'm sure that the museum will continue to inspire, enlighten, and delight the public for many, many generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Venu, for that very heartfelt and passionate speech. And I have experiences on a day-to-day basis at the museum that speak to what you've said. And very much, in fact, when you take that, when you provide space for that conversation to happen, whether it's in the museum or it's been taken out of the museum, The museum has been taken out already. And lots of people ask me, what are you doing to bring this museum out? What are you taking, what are you doing? What steps are you doing, to take the museum out of here? But as I believe that even if that conversation has happened, it has gone somewhere. So at a very basic level, but then, it's
Nothing
a fact.
is too small, Aditi.
Yeah. So next we go into the very exciting quick tour of the Kerala Museum Madhavan Nayar Foundation on the Google Arts and Culture platform. And Jyoti George is going to be helping me to do this. I hope everything goes smoothly. So everyone, please be patient with us if there are any glitches, but here we go.
The last 2 days and this morning also, half an hour she spoke to me.
1 second. Yeah. So this is about Google Arts and about our collection on the platform and how you can access it. Google Arts and Culture was founded in 2011, like Dr. Venu said, and is a not-for-profit initiative within Google that partners with museums, archives, and other cultural organizations. The initiative builds free tools and technologies for partner institutions to help them share their artwork and their artifacts online with a truly global audience. Together with over 2,000 plus partner museums in 90 countries, Google Arts and Culture is working to make the world's art and culture accessible to anyone. There are currently over 6 million artworks and artifacts and nearly 20,000 curated exhibits and 9,000 immersive tours, including virtual reality and street views. Let's search for what's online already on Google Arts and Culture from India. The relationship between Google Arts and Culture. Oh, okay. I think you can't hear me.
We can hear you.
Yeah, you can hear me. Okay, yeah. The relationship between Google Arts and Culture and India began in 2012 with the launch of 2 museums, National Museum and the National Gallery of Modern Art. From those early beginnings, Google Arts and Culture has grown to nearly 100 partners in India. It's great to see Raja Ravi Varma over here and this painting titled The Lady with a Fruit. And that's a very big list. And we're happy to join this family. There's so many of us here now. Okay, let's speed this up. Here's our collection on the Google Arts and Culture platform. Nandal Bose and Raja Ravi Varma, acknowledged as amongst the Navratnas of Indian art, are amongst the treasures of the Kerala Museum that have been digitized with the gigapixel technology. Today, we're delighted to bring online more than 200 artworks from the Kerala Museum's collection. Many hidden gems of modern art, like the portrait of a man by Lalu Prasad Shaw, can now be viewed in never before seen definition, thanks to gigapixel technology, a powerful photo capturing process which has enabled the highest ever resolution image of this feature. Reverie by Raja Ravi Varma is from his repertoire of artworks that depict classical heroines or nayikas waiting for their lover. The painting, when we zoom in, shows how the master skillfully uses the scumbling technique to render the fine translucency of the Kerala cassava cotton sari. Google Arts and Culture's drag and drop storytelling tools enabled our curators to present rich scholarship and hidden context about our museum's treasures. We are proud to unveil 10 stories online today. With them, our online visitors can explore the collection in even more greater detail through immersive digital experience on mobile as well as on your laptop. In these 10 stories, our curators and scholars have detailed the practice of Indian artists and Indian collectives against the backdrop of the nation's historical and cultural atmosphere. Shantiniketan. Oh, let's look at this one, an online story titled The Emergence of Indian Modernism. Bengal School and Shantiniketan form an important part of the Kerala Museum's collection. One of the special aspects of this online story is how we've been able to show Nandal Bose's work alongside one of its inspirations. This ink drawing by Nandal Bose of the Buddha's mother Maya is an artwork named Untitled, and it's a study of cave number 2 at Ajanta and sheds light on his keen interest in frescoes and their influence on his distinctive style. And let's look at the cave number 2 in Ajanta now. You can spot her right there. Some years ago, we had artist Mural, who helped build our collection, led a walk through the Kerala Museum. The storytelling tool enables incorporation of video as well into the digital experience. And with it, we can make connections that were never possible before. And one last thing. The most important part of this launch today is that everything that's online, we've brought it bilingual, Malayalam and English. There are several ways to access the Kerala Museum in Malayalam. First, if your phone's language is set to Malayalam, you'll automatically see the Malayalam version of the content when you use the Google Arts and Culture app. Second, you can simply visit this page on our website. All this is in the press release that we're issuing today, and also it'll be coming out on our social media channels, so you'll be able to follow it. I'm seeing a lot of appreciation in the chat messages. I hope you all are encouraged to go browse the collection on your own devices. And I hope the layers of accessibility available to users and learners is clear to everyone. I now welcome artist and professor Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh in conversation with art historian Professor Anshuman Dasgupta on Shanti Niketan and Baroda, long relations and brief encounters.
Okay, shall we start? Or do you want to introduce, like you said?
I am going to introduce. I was waiting for Ghulam sir to have his mic.
Hello.
Yes, I'm going to introduce you both. Yes.
Okay.
As an artist, poet, teacher, art historian, and curator, Professor Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh has played a major role in the development of contemporary art in India since the 1960s. He took his MA from the Faculty of Fine Arts in Baroda and ARCA from the Royal College of Art, London. His work has spanned painting, printmaking, digital media, ceramics, and sculpture, and has been featured in major exhibitions in India and abroad. Professor Sheikh taught art history and painting for over 3 decades at the Faculty of Fine Arts in Baroda and has acted as curator for significant exhibitions in India as well as in the UK and Australia. He's been an invitee for residencies and lectures at major art centers and universities in India, Europe, and the USA, China, and Australia. His work is held in public collections in museums as well as in private collections all over the world. Professor Dasgupta is an art historian and curator teaching in Vishwabharati University, Shantiniketan since 1997. He studied art history in Shantiniketan and in MS University, Baroda, as well as Goldsmiths College, London, and did a film appreciation in FTII too. A few highlights from his curatorial ventures include the Ramkinkar Bej Centenary Exhibition in Shantiniketan and the Khoj International Artists Workshop Exhibition, where he was the curator critic and the co-curator of Santal family positions around an Indian sculpture. He was the chief official curator from India at the Bauhaus Imaginista exhibition in 2019-2020 and has published books and web journals based on both projects by the same name. Anshuman has also been published by Lalit Kala Contemporary, the Marg volumes, and Nandan, brought out by the Department of Art History, Kala Bhavan, Vishwabharati University. Over to you, Professor Dasgupta.
Thank you very much for your generous introduction, Aditi. And thank you, Sheikh sir, for coming in timely and responding to the questions that I sent you. I would like to straight away start with this question that in Baroda Shantiniketan relation goes way back when it was founded. There are two founding in the foundational era and the foundational age. It had two different people who were alumni of Shantiniketan, like Professor Subramanian and Professor Chaudhuri, Shankho Chaudhuri and KG Subramanian, the two eminent artists for law, who still remains in our memory as some of the greatest in 20th century art. And I would like to ask Professor Sheikh as to, as a student of the second batch, if I'm not incorrect, what was his experience about, that relationship? Was that influencing the pedagogy of the time, or was that some kind of subliminal connection that you felt? Was there a difference that they were making in terms of having come from Shantiniketan?
Well, first of all, let me say that I'm very happy to be here in the company of friends and others. This also reminds me of not only Shantiniketan connection, but also the Kerala connection. And I may speak about it a little later. But let us first delve into that area which Anshuman has mentioned, the making of the Faculty of Fine Arts at the MS University of Baroda. Well, it was the first university where art was taught at a university level in the country. So the best of talents were invited. And there are stories about all the teachers coming to Baroda from various places. Two of the pioneers, Anshuman has already mentioned, Professor Shankho Chaudhary and Professor K.G. Subramanian, whom we call Mani Sahib or Manida. They both came at an early stage. And literally, they pioneered a new phase of education in the country. Besides Professor Bendre, Professor V.R. Ambedkar, and others. I remember in my early days listening to Professor Chaudhary and Professor Subramanian about their days in Shantiniketan. There are a host of memories. I don't know which one to pick. But I do remember that they brought a bit of Shantiniketan in Baroda. One of the things that happened was they introduced even Bengali plays. And we had, in the very first year when I was in Faculty of Fine Arts, in 1955, a play called Hajabarala, if I'm not mistaken, written by Sukumar Ray, father of Satyajit Ray. It's a sort of an absurd play with all kinds of garbled language, but great fun, was actually performed. And I have vivid memory of having seen that play, and that continued. So we had several such plays with Professor Chaudhary brought in, directed. And I remember that sometimes, there were Bengali songs, and we all began to sing them. Besides that, there was another aspect. I think as far as education is concerned, they were interested in the liberal art, and Baroda provided that kind of a possibility because Baroda was a new university. And so one thing that they did, and which I think is most valued, is that the faculty should remain open throughout the day and night. So the students could work during the day in the classrooms, then they go to their respective studios and work again. And if they wish to stay and come back to their studios in the evening, the studios were still open. So if anything has happened in Baroda, it is partly due to this kind of an open studio that Baroda established. And to an extent, I think they had learned their lessons from their mentor, their teachers in Shantiniketan. At a personal level, I would tell you that I got introduced to Bengali art. I mean, we learned in art history, but at the same time, I also learned about some of the living legends of contemporary art, especially in Bengal, and Vinod Bihari Mukherjee among them. So I remember that in 1961, when I was invited to Calcutta for some seminar organized by the Lalit Kala Academy, I made a point to go to Shantiniketan and to see the great mural that Vinod Bihari made in Hindi Bhavan. And its memory still lingers in my mind. I'll come back to that a little later. Shall we go further beside that?
Yes, I mean, like another point that I wanted to raise. I think this point, Binod Bhiri will come back in the end, towards the end of our session. But just another point, that there was a shift from 50s and 60s concerns in Baroda, as we can see visibly. There was a modernist current running through it, like as was there in Bombay, like at the time earlier, like in the 40s, in the turn of the kind of, towards independence. We know the progressives all over India were kind of, the term was very popular and was also influential. If we saw that in your work and other people's work in Baroda, there was a kind of current of formalist, modernist kind, and from which you sort of had an interim period of Brishchik, wherein it and 1890s, when it was becoming a different kind of indigenism. So that was looks like an interlude, and then later on we moved towards narrative, which was more of an agency, which created huge agency of communicative agency. It created between the existing Indian traditions and the world tradition, the global tradition. So it was kind of local into the global, telescoping many things together. So how did this transition take place? Can you recount some of it? Like, did any bit of Shantiniketan or your experience of seeing murals of different kind, like which you wrote in Viewer's View in your brilliant essay, but did it have an impact, or did it have a little role in that?
Well, there are many things. I don't know if we start talking about them, it will take us hours. But to put it in brief, I would say that, you see, modernism came to us in the post-independence era from various sources. Some of our teachers had been abroad and brought with them what they had seen. And in a way, Baroda provided a kind of an open ground for all of us to experiment. They were experimenting themselves. Like Vendre was experimenting, Survanians was experimenting. So we were in that a kind of a, what shall we call, some kind of a melting pot. And we enjoyed it because it was not, the one difference was that our being modern was not devoid of our interest in pre-modern. That we learned in our art history. And as you know, that there were some artists who also worked in quote unquote traditional media. So I would say that there is not a single modernism. That is, means it's not the progressive artist modernism in Bombay. But there are multiple modernisms. So there is something called, if you want to use the word, Baroda modernism. So we developed our own way of dealing with the idea, quote unquote, modern. And we went our own way. You mentioned the group 1890. So it was 1962 when some of us gathered in a restaurant, actually a restaurant called Shalimar Restaurant, which, if I'm not mistaken, it was a South Indian restaurant, and it served beer clandestinely. But I remember that we met there and we decided to form a group, and we made an all India group. And the exhibition took place in Delhi. But that was a period when everybody was seeking, everybody was trying to articulate something which would perhaps give voice to their, whatever inner instincts. And many of us were struggling, in painting, but even in terms of ideas. So that went on for a long period of time, and I think the churning took place in the 1960s. The entire decade of the 1960s was a period of great churning. I'll tell you one small thing, that what we represented in the form of work in the group 1890 exhibition was more or less a kind of a continuation of the modernist ideas which progressive artists had formulated, although we were trying to go above it.
Right.
So
Yeah.
our ideas were ahead of our work. And those actually then finally, found some kind of a language, and that happened in mid-60s and later on. So I would say that churning eventually produced something which we may call a phenomenon in which a number of artists found their voice. Some, like Bhupen Khakkar, went in one direction, I went to another, Swaminathan into third, etc., etc. It was happening. So it took a long time before we all came to find our voice. I think in the 1970s, that inquiry literally began to fructify. There were two factors, let me tell you one. One was that we became aware of the socio-political climate of the country, and we began to infuse that in our work. The second was to become confessional, to talk about oneself, one's own life, one's own surrounding. And this gave art a very specific dimension. And hence, what you call narrative was actually a personal narrative. In the case of Nalini Malani, she called it as you have already heard, it's not his story, but her story. That's her own story. So we all, in that sense, through the, let us say, idiom of narrative, found our own personal selves and our own worlds. And that is how it continued for a period of time. I hope I have made it in. I cannot make it shorter than this.
No. I think, but you also kind of, were probably also at the same time, there was several encounters, the magic realism encounter, the Richard Lenoy kind of, speaking tree encounter, anthropological interest in Indian culture, actually, in figuring out the living traditions, etc. I think there was this connection which was like how to handle the live traditions, the things that are live and active, and then how to sort of learn from that, and learning to learn from below to some extent. It was a kind of exercise that I could see throughout in your life, and up to the cupboard. I think I could follow that track, and I think that there's a streak of, I could relate that to the kind of thing Vinod Bheri was doing, or Nandlal was doing, or even Ramkinkar at times was doing, kind of learning to learn from below. And I could see the connection. There was some kind of a parallelism. You can say that derivation, but parallelism in that. Was there kind of percolation of energy of that kind? I mean, like through dialogue?
You are right in one way. I mean, we drew upon a number of sources. I mean, we had our great love for some of the modern masters of the Western world, but we also knew the pre-modern world of art in the West, like C.N.A. And I established a connection with somebody like Timothy Hyman on that basis.
Right.
We also had our own connection with our own masters. Of course, Hussain was very much part of our makeup in that sense. But Nandalal, Vinod Bihari, and Ramkinkar were also very strong catalysts, nuclei to take. You take from, you use them as springboard and then entered into your own territory. And they provided that because they were all so, in a way, rooted in the local culture. Not only Bengal, but largely speaking, a kind of a broader Bengal, if I were to say. Right. And we learned a great deal from that. So in a way, our modernism was somewhat different than the modernism that we imbibed from the West. And so I think contemporary Indian art, in a sense, found its own identity from its own surroundings, from its own background, from its own history. As I said, that 60s was a period of churning, but a churning because of the socio-political event. Even 70s, for that matter, even emergency provided. I painted something called Speechless City during that period of time. So, earlier, I think artists were shy of bringing in political issues. And that sort of, somehow sort of our generation felt that we need not worry about this and we should go directly to that. And so I would say that in a way, Binod Bihari's Hindi Bhavan mural was also responding to the time of independence.
Right.
He painted it just around. Can you believe it is on the cusp of the independence, on that period of time when he was painting that? And do you also not remember that Progressive Artist Group was also made around the same time? What a coincidence. Something was happening in Bombay, and here was a man sitting in Shantiniketan painting 3 walls and painted something like 88-foot mural. So I think this is what was part of our makeup. We inherited it. Of course, we had to inherit quite a lot, which we did. But at the same time, we also chose the kind of inheritance that we would like to use in our own work.
Thank you very much, Sheikh Bhai. Just the next very, what do you call, very, very important question. I thought that you had undertaken the task of curating Binod Bihari's, exhibition, the centenary exhibition of Binod Bihari in NGMA. And it was a fantastic exhibition, and I think it was an eye-opener for many people who hadn't seen the entire collection. From private and public, both collections were included, and the murals were replicated, and large scrolls were there to see, for people to see, and also kind of were projected, and sketchbooks were kind of made alive, stuff like that. And there's beautiful kind of projections of multiple times that you actually talk about in theories, but then that one sees coming alive in Binod Bihari exhibition. Any thoughts on, was it kind of brewing in you for long, or kind of it's a momentary response? Like I also remember in connection with what you said about the cusp of independence and Binod Bihari's mural, I also always kind of, while taking classes, I just mentioned that incidentally, that just before that, there was Noakhali riot in Bangladesh, to which Gandhiji had gone and to visit Bangladesh to stop the riot. In a sense, Nandalal has a drawing of that in a postcard form. And there's kind of, that is part of the constitution, actually, the illustrated constitution, incidentally. And also that, also it sort of, it incidentally talks about Bhakti movement. It can't be fortuitous that it talks about North Indian Bhakti movement, actually, the mural shows the Bhakti poets, actually, including Kabir and Sudas and Ramdas and everyone. So that looks absolutely enlivening, including the method by which it was projected and onto the wall. Any thoughts on that, please?
Well, again, it is a long story. To cut it short, I'd put it that the idea was growing in my mind ever since I saw the Hindi Bhavan mural in 1961 as a young artist visiting Shantiniketan. And I was literally floored by that. And I thought that someday I must pay my tribute to this. And in a sense, he happens to be mentor of my mentor, Subramanian's teacher. And so that way, whatever it is not just arousing the legacy of the time, but I wanted his work to be seen and shown in a manner at a place where people would connect with his work and his ideas. So that way, NGMA allowed us to use all the spaces. And Shiv Kumar and I both worked tirelessly for months together and finally put it together. This is no time to just talk about that particular exhibition, but that exhibition also was an eye-opener for us, not for somebody like you, but also for the curators to look at the work of a man which was not seen by many until then. And I may mention that we did not get that kind of a response from the contemporary political, I don't know, I don't want to go into that, but the thing is that that exhibition did not travel. I wanted that exhibition to travel to Calcutta. We wanted that exhibition to travel to Bombay, but somehow that did not happen. But I was very happy that we were able to publish a number of books and even brought out a CD on the life and work of Vinod Vihari Mukherjee. But anyway, I think time is short, and if one wants to speak about other things, let us proceed further.
Aditi, are we crossing the time limit?
We're
Dr.
just
Tharoor is
about
there.
right at the moment. Dr. Tharoor is
Okay,
just
okay.
ahead.
I just,
Yeah.
Let me tell you one or two things before we
Okay.
proceed.
Yes, yes.
You see, Madhavan Nayar came to my residence, I remember, long time ago. I do not remember the time and day. But he wanted to build up a collection, and I was very excited. I do not know how my work did not form part of his collection, but I was very sympathetic because somebody single-handedly wanted to build a collection, and he wanted to make an all India collection. I was thinking of Bharat Bhavan, and here, because Mr. Tharoor is here, let me say that Bharat Bhavan is a model that it reflects the federal structure of our polity. That Bharat Bhavan brings out the modern in Indian art. At the same time, it brings with it the tribal tradition. And at the same time, it also promotes the art that was produced in the state itself, state of Madhya Pradesh. I think that was an interesting way of dealing with the idea of a museum, the kind of a museum that you would have, which would not only be limited to one section of society, but it would deal with multiple. And also, it's not just a museum, but also a kind of an art center, which would become a living place. And let me pay my tribute to art of Kerala today. We have had literally dozens of students from Kerala who came to Baroda, and many of them are extremely creative artists. Most amazing is the fact at the moment it appears that Kerala perhaps has the most vibrant contemporary art scene. And I would think that Madhavan Nayar Foundation would bring in artists of Kerala to join in. And if at all the museum expands further, we shall all be happy to, let us say, participate, cooperate, and perhaps even, the collection of the 200 works that there is may become much larger, and it may become more accessible to the public. Thank you. This is just odd thoughts that came to my mind.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sheikh sir.
I'm sorry I'm taking a little longer.
Thank you, Professor Dasgupta. Thank you for bringing out that connection between the two major art centers, art institutions, and traditions. And thank you, Professor Sheikh, for giving us those personal vignettes that really added, to our experience of the detail of your memory. Thank you so much.
Thank you
We
very
were meant to
much.
take a break, but since Dr. Shashi Tharoor is here with us today already, I think we'll move on to that section. For those of you who have just joined us, starting today, the 22nd of January, 2022, the Kerala Museum Madhavan Nayar Foundation's collection is live on the Google Arts and Culture platform. And I'm going on to introduce Dr. Shashi Tharoor, who really needs no introduction, to deliver the keynote address. Following the keynote address, we shall also take some selected questions from the audience, and you can please put it in the Q&A section, and we'll try and pick up appropriate questions for Dr. Tharoor to expand upon. Dr. Shashi Tharoor, a third-term member of Parliament for Thiruvananthapuram, is the best-selling author of 23 books, both fiction and non-fiction, besides being a former Under-Secretary General of the United Nations and a former Minister of State for Human Resource Development and for External Affairs in the Government of Kerala, India. Sorry. Including the Pravasi Bharatiya Samman, a Commonwealth Writers' Prize, and the Crossword Lifetime Achievement Award. In 2019, Dr. Tharoor was also awarded the Sahitya Academy Award in the category of English non-fiction for his book, An Era of Darkness. He chairs Parliament's Standing Committee on Information Technology. His keynote address, Dr. Tharoor will share his thoughts on diversity, dialogue, and the digital, 21st century India and museums. I welcome you, Dr. Tharoor, to our live.
Thank you very much, Aditi. It was a pleasure to join you all as I was hearing the end of that excellent discussion between Professor Ghulam Mohammad Sheikh and Professor Anshuman Dasgupta. I see Dr. Venu, the Traditional Chief Secretary of the Government of Kerala, Professor K.T. Ravindran, are both there. My greetings to them as well. And of course to you as the Museum Director, distinguished members of the audience and friends. It really is a pleasure to join you all this morning on the memorable occasion of the digital launch of the Madhavan Nayar Foundation's Kerala Museum on the Google Arts and Culture Global platform. I've been looking forward to joining all of you in person, but the recent resurgence of COVID through the new highly transmissible Omicron variant has sadly meant that we all have to convene virtually. In fact, I had the mortification of watching 7 commitments in Kerala between yesterday and next week, all being cancelled because of the ban on public functions. And so here we are connected thanks to technology. And so that's a big theme of today's conversations. I'm glad we're able to come together and celebrate this memorable moment in the history of the MN Foundation's Kerala Museum. As some of you may know, I have an old personal connection with the foundation, a relationship that stems from the strong bond of friendship shared between my late father, Chandran Tharoor, and the founder of the Kerala Museum, the late R. Madhavan Nayar, a giant who carved out a legacy that rests not just on his exploits as a successful businessman and an ambitious entrepreneur, but for the manner in which he patronized and developed a modern-day revival of arts and conservation in the state of Kerala. Though he's no longer with us, I have no doubt that he'd be looking down with a sense of pride at this new phase in the journey of the Madhavan Nayar Foundation that's being steered by his grandniece Aditi, who all of you know through her role as director of the museum. Let me take this opportunity to congratulate both the teams at the Kerala Museum and Google Arts and Culture for bringing alive this impressive collection of art and heritage in the digital space. As a Malayali, it gives me great pride to see that the best of Kerala and of India, as seen through one of the great collections of modern Indian art, is now being made available online. And of course, we are speaking today in English, but it's situated in Malayalam territory. It's not just that, it's Malayalam first, and an invaluable resource for not just art aficionados and learners, but also for general audiences. You can see some of the greatest works of modern Indian art like never before, wherever they may be in the world, and from practically any mobile device. To my mind, this marriage of art and technology is truly exciting, since it may very well hold the key not just for the future and the survivability of our nation's museums, but could very well define the manner in which subsequent generations engage with and explore the cultural heritage that they've inherited. It's striking that despite our immeasurably rich and pluralistic heritage, our museums, largely speaking, have, especially in recent times, not been able to attract the levels of engagement that many of their Western counterparts have. For instance, to my mind, it's a travesty that in the 2 years between 2016 and 2018, which is the last period for which I could get figures, our National Museum had roughly 5.5 lakh visitors in total, whereas the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art had 70 lakh visitors in just 2017 alone. Now, there are a number of factors responsible, I'd say, for the recent decline in our country's museums and in our ability to engage audiences. And certainly official apathy is a key reason. Step into an Indian museum today and one is invariably taken aback by the state of affairs, be it exhibits falling apart or anodyne captions that seldom convey the richness of the artifact one is observing, or even the availability of resources to guide visitors through what the museum has to offer. There's a reason why, for most Indians at the moment, a visit to a museum is a decidedly dreary proposition. There are artifacts, but do they speak to you? Do they tell you beyond tedious plaques and reading cards of what they represent or what their age witnessed? Museums are homes to objects, but they must also serve as repositories of legacies, of tales of people and societies, manifesting ideas and thought. We in India have admittedly failed at this. Thousands are our people who will line up in Rome or London or Paris outside iconic galleries, seeking to glimpse the Mona Lisa or unravel an Egyptian mummy, hoping to educate themselves in the history of distant lands. And I'm not knocking that. There's much to appreciate around the world. In fact, when I launched the British edition of my colonialism book under the blunt title Inglorious Empire, one of my events was at the Victoria and Albert Museum in dialogue with its director, while on the floor beneath us stood the famous animated tiger of Tipu Sultan, mauling a British redcoat. That's one museum artifact that even more than the Kohinoor, I would love to see back in India. But in India itself, besides lines of restless school children who are essentially compelled to tour dusty museums and look interested, we have a problem in the way we run our institutions of art and culture. Now, in the courts of our kings and princes, there were always great libraries and collections of art and artifacts. Our Maharajas were patrons of art, sculpture, and music, and not just from within their domains. Our temples, with their exquisite sculptures, were the embodiment of our strongest artistic traditions and aesthetic sensibilities. But the concept of the public museum is a relatively new one. Of course, there are still many decent government-run museums in the country, but the challenges I mentioned certainly appear to be growing and have not been helped by significant delays in appointments to key posts or successive budget cuts to the Ministry of Culture, which I think gets something like 0.01% of the government budget. But there are reasons beyond the government as well. For instance, access has always been an important barrier in our ability to enjoy the richness of our museums. And I don't just mean physical access, but also access in terms of language and comprehension, although efforts have certainly been made to address this to some extent through audio guides in various Indian languages. We must aim to reorient our way of running museums, of improving the experience that these establishments provide, and to sustain at the highest levels standards as well as revenue. Now, here, of course, there are no easy answers. But one of the answers we must consider is the growing involvement of private players, as in this museum that we're celebrating or inaugurating today. Museums, after all, cannot just be buildings full of attractive things. They must also offer an education and a live, dynamic space where new art is constantly created, even as the old is respectfully enshrined. Which brings me to the key challenge of engagement. Let's face it, for a young Indian today, or indeed for most of us older ones for that matter, most people would rather spend their free time tuning into a show on Netflix or watching a cricket match, or in the event that they step out of their homes to go to a restaurant or a park. The idea of visiting a museum for most seems to have been reserved for when they visit a foreign country, or at the very least travel outside the city they live in. Now, I'd argue this has to do with the ability of our museums, or the lack of ability of our museums to cater to the engagement requirements of individuals in modern times. There's still much to be done. We need to aspire to museums so good that they attract tourists as much as the Louvre or the British Museum does. The link between our cultural heritage and tourism is too often overlooked. And that's how cultural capital contributes to development. Much of the world's tourism is culturally motivated. Museum tourism must be developed and recognized as an organized industry which uses cultural heritage as its backbone. Where cultural tourism is identified as part of an overall development strategy, a comprehensive plan for the identification, protection, and enhancement of heritage resources can be put in place, which is also vital for any sustainable effort. Museums in India have acted as custodians of art and culture so far, but their activity should not be limited to only having to collect, preserve, and share objects and materials of cultural, religious, and historical importance. In the 21st century, museums need to impart cultural education effectively and thereby strive to become agents of change and development. Art historians, museologists, and conservators are embracing technology in various forms. In the image-based field of art history, the integration of digital technology is no longer a choice, it's a necessity. Museologists have used technology to bring museums to the doorstep of the individual by creating concepts like the virtual museum. Conservators are using new age methods like laser technologies and 3D imaging technologies for improved and accurate conservation and restoration techniques. I hope, Aditi, that your museum has a technology budget too to enhance the visitor's experience. Which is why the coming together of art and technology, as is the case today, is such an exciting prospect, for it effectively addresses many of the contemporary challenges being faced by our museums. It addresses the issue of access. Think about an NRI Malayali family based in the Gulf who can raise their children with access to meaningful resources on Kerala's rich syncretic traditions. It can also very well serve as a potent tool to address the issue of engagement. Through technology like virtual reality and augmented reality, exhibitions will no longer be seen as idle entities, but be presented in a manner that stimulates our curiosity and willingness to explore the many conversations and collaborations that our plural cultures and heritage are based on. I've been fortunate to spend some time with the director, exploring the collection for myself. Thank you, Aditi. And it's been a revelation to enjoy the online storytelling that you've created. The Tiger by Chanchal Mukherjee was fascinating. And to be guided with Zoom and curatorial notes through this amazing artwork's intricacies in a virtual exhibition has been very special. The exhibition on the emergence of modern Indian art is a reminder that the artists in Shanti Niketan and the Bengal School influenced and echoed the sentiments of a nation. Online storytelling enabled institutions and curators to present diverse perspectives even on well-known artworks. And this reminds us, I think, of the necessity of engaging stories and their central role in social change. Public spaces and institutions have a special responsibility of not just reflecting the history that we're in the midst of, but also telling stories that help multiple sectors to engage with the goals of civil society. When all these sections of society, civic leaders, government, philanthropic organizations, educators, activists, industry, and others all engage in a shared vision, that is the start of progress towards its achievement and towards a more equal world. Almost a decade ago, during my tenure as a minister in the then Ministry for Human Resources Development, I had the opportunity to address alongside Dr. Venu the 2013 graduating batch of the National Museum Institute. But during my address to the graduates, one aspect that I stressed on, which is relevant to today's gathering, is that we must rethink the manner in which we conceptualize a museum today. One of the big mistakes that we make is we tend to look at museums as static entities. That is, we rightly see them as custodians of our art and culture. The role of the museum has been in many ways limited by definition as an institution whose sole task is to collect, preserve, and share objects and materials of cultural, religious, and historic importance. To my mind, that would be a mistake, especially in today's times when forces seek to weaponize tools like history and cultural heritage for narrow-minded political purposes. On the contrary, in the 21st century, museums need to strive to become agents of change and development themselves. As institutions possessing critical resources in society, one of the fundamental objectives of museums must be to impart cultural education effectively, as it houses the tools and materials for doing so. It seems to me that by doing that, museums can serve as institutions that accelerate the cultivation of a certain cultural capital among Indians, a reservoir of tangible and intangible cultural expressions of our society. Now, the arts are a catalyst. I recently read of a study where children were asked, what is it that an artist does? And overwhelmingly, the answer was, they notice things. This, in essence, can be said to be what an institution like the Madhavan Nayar Foundation and the Kerala Museum offer, a space and a place where the greatest of modern India's artists can be understood and explored, where what they notice can be brought to the attention of all who are interested, the members of India's public. With this incomparable collection, the museum presents an opportunity for young and old alike to learn more about their world and to find themselves amidst and with others. I therefore congratulate the Kerala Museum on its new directions. I came to the old Kerala Museum, and I'm looking forward to physically visiting you all in a post-COVID era. But now, in its new direction, the Kerala Museum was enabled anywhere to access its highlights and hidden gems. And I want to thank you for this, Aditi and your team. May the coming years have you going from milestone to milestone. And I look forward to being part of this journey too, even if only as a visitor. Thank you all. I look forward to your questions and comments. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Dr. Tharoor. Thank you, Dr. Tharoor. Can you hear me? Yeah. And with that, with this, as there isn't a ribbon cutting moment, we can actually reproduce on Zoom with Dr. Tharoor's talk. Our virtual exhibition is now launched. Please have a look at it, everyone. We'll be sending on the chat, the links to go and see and browse. Yeah, there are a couple of questions coming in. I'm going to repeat them on the Zoom, and if you can, please expand. One is, you've spoken before on the 4 E's of education: expansion, equity, excellence, and employability. Which amongst these 4 E's would art and culture in education positively impact the most? Which one of these would be most benefited from art and culture?
Yes. Well, all in some ways, if you look at them in turn, equity is simply about making sure that all sorts of people who are excluded in the past are included today, across gender lines, tribal, ethnic, linguistic, and so on. Expansion is again the same thing, being all out, going out, embracing, getting larger numbers involved. Excellence, of course, requires an appreciation of quality. And employability is quite simply about preparing people for what the real world offers today. Now, perhaps employability we can put aside because not all employers are enlightened enough to appreciate a culturally sensitive museum-going applicant. Though I might admit that as we are looking at more and more museums expanding, people who understand art and culture and museums might well find employment in museums. So that's not necessarily ruled out either. So one could say that perhaps all these 4 criteria would be relevant when it comes to what museums have to offer. When I have to say that when we look at what's been going on to museums everywhere in our country, and when we look at the way in which our people are discovering the potential for museums, I'll take a non-Kerala example, the Chhatrapati Shivaji Museum in Bombay, for example, invested in its people under a new director general. And they brought in trained staff, hired new people, put in new signage, better presentation of collection, conducted outreach programs, added partnerships with foreign museums, and suddenly footfalls increased by 40%. And a museum that used to receive a handful of visitors daily now sees a steady stream of impressed local citizens and foreign tourists. Now, that is something which I believe could happen anywhere in the country. You've taken a very interesting and creative route to, again, expanding your audience and creating a new energy for the Kerala Museum. Other museums can do similar things, and then all these 4 E's would apply once again in this field as well.
Thank you, Dr. Tharoor. Dr. Shastri, who's a museum professional, and he says, what is your message to the museum fraternity in context of the current Indian museum movement? What is your message to the museum fraternity in the context of the current Indian museum movement?
Well, one of the things I've said to all of you is my message. I mean, I think my opening remarks are the principal message. As a lover of history, I will make one other observation, which I think is important, because the truth is that, I remarked that the union budget is giving only 0.1% of its annual funds to the Ministry of Culture. And that's something to a ministry that must address not only the needs of our 1,000-odd aging museums, but also libraries, archives, and a host of other organizations. And then we have the sheer confusing diversity of authorities managing Indian museums, right? So besides those institutions that function under the authority of the Culture Ministry, there are museums under the Railway Ministry and even the Textiles Ministry. There are museums of the Archaeological Survey of India, those of hundreds of municipal corporations. There are palace museums housed in stately homes where Maharajas once lived, like in Mysore. There are medical museums. There are museums that are extensions of universities and colleges. Now, such diversity is not in and of itself a bad thing. But what I think we must do is to reorient our way of running them, of improving the experience that these establishments provide, and of course, to maintain the highest level of standards. And that's where I was happy to celebrate what you've done in the Kerala Museum today, because what you're doing is really to open up the space to all of this. And let's face it, historically, most artists, sculptors, artisans, painters, musicians, dancers had to depend upon the patronage of the elite, of the Maharajas. Today, Maharajas don't exist officially, and even if they do, they don't have the kind of disposable resources and palaces available. The palaces have all become hotels. We lived in a world in which only a Shah Jahan could have built the Taj Mahal. Today, we are living in a world in which, of course, no one builds Taj Mahals unless they are multi-billionaires running companies and benefiting from some of the changes in our economy in recent years. Now, it's one of the peculiar tragedies of India that fields such as classical history, art, architecture, and the like have therefore been orphaned, right? They've been relegated to the preserve of an elite with a very small number of people who can afford to finance them, and those people are by and large not interested in financing them. So my message, my final aspect of my message will be the urgent need to remind our people, the Indian public, of their own association, their own role, their own stake in our cultural heritage. We have to take it out of the realm of the courts and the corporate boardrooms and make it truly a treasure of the people. We need to democratize our cultural heritage. That, I think, would probably be my answer if I had to add one more element to the message we're giving you today. Let's democratize our cultural heritage.
Thank you, Dr. Tharoor. When we say visitor-centric approach at the museum, it's literally saying that our most important patron is our visitor. And, that's where I'd like us to aspire to be, really. We have one other question that's come in, which is about technology and Kerala's youth Are there any specific examples that come to your mind about where technology has been used successfully for youth to imbibe their cultural traditions?
Well, it's happening more and more. The whole concept of the virtual museum has definitely been a very important, very, very important idea. And there's some amazing things happening worldwide with laser technology and 3D imaging to improve the way in which art is restored and preserved and made accessible to people. In Bangalore, I remember I was asked to inaugurate the MAP museum, which has actually become a private museum featuring some 15,000 objects and works, and doing it with a great deal of interactivity through technology in Bangalore. So I think that we should try and emulate the kind of good things that are being done this way. I haven't yet been to the Partition Museum in Amritsar, but I'm told they're also trying to include online interactivity. There's now a new museum called the Archive of Indian Music. And of course, you can't really listen to music without technology. So technology there would be very much being used in that particular museum. So I would say that all of this is happening. We're at the early stages of the journey. The Kerala Museum is a pioneer. And I hope that the youth of Kerala will start with the Kerala Museum and then branch out to see all that's happening through technology elsewhere in the world. Very recently, I got a link to the entire collections of the Louvre. I don't think I'll live long enough to see every piece of art that's been embodied in that virtual meeting. But now a young man in Kerala or a young woman in Kerala who could not dream of affording a ticket to go to Paris to see the Louvre and spending enough days there to see everything she wants to see can now go online and with extremely sophisticated high resolution technology can see everything she would love to see herself. So these possibilities are there. So if the question is, how does this young Keralite use technology to enhance his or her appreciation of art and culture? The answer is by just going on the internet, getting out there and seeing what's already available and all the stuff that's going to be more and more available with the passage of time.
Thanks, Dr. Karur. We have one response to your previous question. Narayan says equity would require to serve the diversity in the population in a way that's right for their individual needs. Suchitra Narayanan says, yeah. And I think she doesn't mean representing every community, but being able to provide accessibility to everyone at the museum.
But I don't disagree with the proposition. Of course, diversity is never an end in itself. It's a fact of life in our country. We are a diverse country, whether we like it or not. And I'm certainly one of those who likes it and wants to celebrate. But it certainly, as the questioner says, would need to be served in a way that's right for their individual needs. Now, not every need can be attended to or catered to in every specific institution, but the institution should offer, if you like, enough possibilities for people of diverse backgrounds to dip into them and find what they want out there. So that's really wonderful.
Yeah. I'm just reading out from the chat, one other. Shashi Tharoor's speech was very good and had several insightful observations about the role of museums in India. I particularly liked his remark in answer to a question that museums require the support of the people at large and should be liberated from the dependence on the munificence of the wealthy.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm grateful for that comment. Yeah. And I think, you can do it. For example, more and more of this is coming online for free. The Louvre link I mentioned is actually available for free. The Louvre isn't charging anything. And even the Kerala Museum website could perhaps link to some of the pieces there because it doesn't cost you anything to make that accessible for people who will come. So you might find Keralites going to the Louvre through the Kerala Museum. Why not? The possibilities that are opening up today are so much greater than they ever used to be. And that's going to be wonderful as well. Of course, you must preserve the physical museum for those of us who are able to come to Kalamassery and go and see it there and step into the premises. But this online technology thing is absolutely a wonderful way of expanding your reach, expanding your audience, and expanding your collection as well.
Yeah, online storytelling allows us to pick up from really anyone who would, possibly collaborate even on an exhibition with us, The other story, the other question from Tash Tekekra, building on JFK's ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Given the state of decline in how society values culture today, we are hearing a lot about what should be done in general to revive this. But what do our panelists think each one of us and them can individually do to change this? And I think this question is for everyone also. So Dr. Tarun, maybe after you, we can take it in a round and then, yeah.
Well, I've really been speaking at some length as an author and speaker. I try and raise awareness. I try and sensitize people to these issues as much as I can. As a member of parliament, I have been demanding and arguing for more allocations for the Ministry of Culture. Not successful because I'm not with the ruling elements, as it were. I am, however, also advocating very strongly better conduct by the Culture Ministry in terms of hiring staff, performance, and all of that. I have, in the policy space, tried to advocate for certain improvements in certain decisions. Ultimately, in politics, being in power enables you to get a lot more done. And being in opposition enables you perhaps to make noise more freely. So I'm doing the latter because I'm in opposition. But I would say that there is no question that a great deal needs to be done to preserve art, to improve the spaces where art is preserved, to improve the professional standards in our country. I made a fuss in 2015 about the fact that the Archaeological Survey of India had to admit that 2 statues from the 2nd and 3rd centuries before Christ, 2,000 years old plus, were damaged because of careless handling at one of India's oldest museums. I mean, when you talk about lighting and signage and basic maintenance and leaky roofs and crumbling plaster, all being neglected, then each of us needs to fight to ensure that these things are attended to, improved, that resources are found for them, and that the institutions are sustained effectively and their collections are maintained. So all of these things represent to me what I can do as a writer, as a member of parliament, and to the extent that I can influence the policy space, that's what I would do. But I think you've got panelists who have far more direct involvement in connection, and they should be the ones perhaps answering this question.
Professor K.T. Ravindran, would you like to go? You have to unmute yourself. Huh?
I'm sorry for the unmute. Basically, I'd like to say that as a spin-off of this new changed level of communication that we'll establish with people, if there are more selective discussions or group discussions or further curating from these images to like fine-tune their input into contemporary art history and so on, I'll be most happy to contribute.
Yeah. So with that, I think we're done. We have a couple other questions on our YouTube page, but I think we're running out of time. So Dr. Tarur, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today to inaugurate the virtual exhibition of our collection.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure and good luck. I'm looking forward to visiting one day, physically as well.
With that, we come to the close of this webinar, and let me invite Foundation Trustee Ram Nayar to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Aditi. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, yes.
In one sense, we are all here today because of one man, and that is our Madhavan Nayar. He was a pathbreaker, and visionary, trailblazer, innovator, and finally, philanthropist, the likes of which we may not have seen in Kerala for quite some time. He was associated with the seafood industry, and as everybody knows, he was the doyen of the seafood industry in India. The very first consignment of frozen seafood having left his factory in Cochin as far back as 1953. He had the vision at that time to engage ocean-going trawlers staffed with Norwegian crew at that point of time. His passion for history, arts, culture, and education was immense. And it must be borne in mind that the creation of these assets, not only the art section, but also the history section, which contains 38 tableaus, were as a result of his passion. Each one of these tableaus were well researched. He consulted people, and you could scarcely get past him without being drawn into a discussion or a small lecture. I remember that as a much younger person. Finally, these were all created from his own resources entirely, with virtually no inputs from any other source or institution. Post 1996, when he passed away, the trust was managed by Mr. Indushega and my father, Brigadier R.B. Nayar, and locally very efficiently managed by my brother, who's unfortunately not with us anymore, Raj Nayar, and his wife Arun, who's still actively involved, and now, of course, in the able hands of Aditi. Major transformations have taken place in the last few years, especially going digital, culminating with this going digital with Google. Let me take this opportunity to thank all the speakers for a very erudite talk. Dr. Shashi Tharoor was delightful to listen to. Dr. Venu Vasudevan, Professor Ravindran, Professor Sheikh, and Professor Dasgupta. Thank you once again for this lovely event. And I want to close by quoting a small Apache prayer, which goes something like this. May the sun bring you new energy by day. May the moon softly restore you by night. May the rain wash away your worries. May the breeze blow new strength into your being. May you walk gently through the world and know its beauty all the days of your life. Thank you very much.
Thank you all the best. Wishing you all success.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Tharoor.
Thank you.
Thank you,
very
Dr. Venu is
much.
no longer with us. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Professor Sheikh. And thank you, Dr. Dasgupta. Thank you so much. You've
Thank
been
you.
such a support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Okay, bye everyone. Thank you.
Bye,
There are
bye.
links in the chat that will help you navigate the collection, and you can copy them down. The museum's website is also in that list, and it's keralamuseum.org. And right there, you'll see Google partnership in Malayalam and in English, both. And please share as widely as possible so that everyone can benefit from the stories we've put out. Bye, everyone. Thank you. Thank you so
you
much
very
for
much.
joining.
Thank you, Aditi. Thank you.
Thank you, Aditi. Thank you.